Hello, I'm here without any wine again, just to introduce a tasting that I made on a flight recently. This was a flight between Dubai and Brisbane with Emirates, travelling this time in premium economy. The wine I'm looking at is a sparkling wine. It's Domaine Chandon's 2018 vintage. Now, Moet Chandon, the world's largest champagne producer, started producing sparkling wines outside of the Champagne region as long ago as 1959, when they invested in a production facility in Argentina. Subsequent to that, they ended up working in both California and Brazil. More recently, they've expanded into India and China, but it was in the 1980s that they started working in Australia. What had happened was that in 1982, John Wright, who at that stage was running Domaine Chandon in California, visited Australia. And he felt that there was a can-do attitude with Australian winemakers Moet Chandon could utilise. And I think their idea was that to have a property in Australia would help them approach Asian markets. An interesting idea given the fact that at that stage, Australia's principal export market for its wines was the UK. Wright and his bosses conferred further about this. And I believe on the advice of James Halliday, the wine writer and at that stage winemaker, they chose to engage one of Australia's leading winemakers, somebody called Dr. Tony Jordan, to find the perfect site for them to plant a vineyard and to establish a winery in Australia. Jordan accepted this assignment quite willingly, but was ambitious and was looking to do something really special. So he was looking for a cool climate area with sufficient diversity of terroir to give him the blending options he felt he needed. To this end, the Yarra Valley seemed a natural choice. I think its location so close to Melbourne was actually a factor in helping establish a successful cellar door here. At any rate, an old 130 hectare dairy farm called Green Point that sat just around the corner from producers such as Yarra Yering and Coldstream Hills was purchased. Planting and work building a winery started here in 1987. Evidently, Tony Jordan so enjoyed the assignment here that he became the estate's first chief winemaker and then managing director. Domaine Chandon released its first cuvées here in 1989. They currently have 190 hectares of estate vineyards in 3 locations. They have their vineyards in the Yarra Valley, in Coldstream, surrounding the winery. They also have a vineyard in the Strathbogie Ranges, and more recently they've acquired the Whitlands Vineyard in the King Valley. So the vineyard in the Yarra Valley comprises 41 hectares of vines, were first planted in 1987. And initially, a lot of the wines made and sold by Domaine Chandon were produced largely from fruit that was purchased from other growers. In 1994, they established an 81 hectare vineyard in the Strathbogie Ranges. These are vineyards at an altitude of about 600 metres above sea level, so in quite a cool situation, and with friable granite-based soils. They're quite ideal for making base wine for sparkling wines. The Whitlands Vineyard, possibly one of Victoria's best-known cool climate vineyards, was established by Brown Brothers in the King Valley back in 1982. Now, this is a plateau that sits between about 800 and 850 metres above sea level and comprises the western ridge of the King Valley. There are 58 hectares of vines here, and these were acquired by Domaine Chandon in 2013. Now, Chandon Australia originally sold its wine, certainly in some markets, under the label of Green Point, echoing the name of the old farm that it had been established on. But this nomenclature was phased out in the mid to late 2000s, say 2007, 2008, being replaced simply by Domaine Chandon. I think originally the idea had been to avoid confusion with Domaine Chandon in California. Now, 2018 was an exceptional vintage for Domaine Chandon in Australia. It was characterised by a warm, dry growing season that produced high-quality, concentrated fruit, and coming from their high-altitude vineyards at Whitlands and in the Strathbogie Ranges, this fruit was balanced by good, tight, crisp acidity. Now, the back label of this wine says that all the grapes that went into it came from their own estate vineyards. Now, I believe the largest portion of the fruit came from Whitlands, and the other principal component was from the vineyards in the Strathbogie Ranges. And they say that fruit would have contributed tight acidity and a real purity of fruit. The technical notes do say that a small amount of fruit from other prestigious regions is included in the blend. If this is all estate fruit, that can only be a small amount of fruit also coming from the Yarra Valley vineyards. I had to look quite hard for it, but eventually I did find the blend of the wine detailed. And I'm told it's 51% Pinot Noir, 48% Chardonnay. So the remaining percentage there is Meunier or Pinot Meunier. Notes I've seen suggest that it's likely all the wine underwent malolactic conversion, and I was quite surprised to see the wine evidently spent 5 years aging on its lees in the cellars. From my tasting, the style I saw was much fruitier and didn't have an emphasis on yeastiness that would have suggested that to me. Maybe that's a function of tasting this at altitude, where the fruit's aromatics have been enhanced and perhaps its acidity's been subdued slightly. If that's the case, however, that also points to the fact that this wine's had over 7 years aging on cork, which is something that I do actually come back to during the tasting. So thank you for joining me, and I hope you enjoy the tasting that follows. Because as it slowly opened up in the glass, I actually became more and more impressed with this wine, eventually alighting on a score of 91 out of 100. And I would note that I've subsequently checked, and that is also what the Wine Searcher aggregated critic score for this wine comes out at. Hello there. Today I'm flying on an Emirates Airbus A380 between Dubai and Brisbane on my way back to New Zealand. I thought that for this 13-hour leg of my flight, it would be quite a nice idea to use my points and get an upgrade to Premium Economy. So while I was here, I thought I should take a look at the wines. So in my glass, I have some Domaine Chandon, which is an Australian sparkling wine. It's the Domaine Chandon 2018 vintage Brut. The wine is a blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir and Meunier. The winery that Moet Chandon developed in Australia was established by somebody called Dr. Tony Jordan, who's a highly influential figure in the development of Australia's wine industry, and particularly in terms of the development of sparkling wine there. And actually, Tony worked pretty much throughout Moet Chandon and LVMH, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy's wine division, particularly working with sparkling wines at places such as Greenpoint in the Yarra Valley, Cloudy Bay in New Zealand. And actually, he was the person who had a lot to do with pioneering Ao Yun, a still red wine they made in China. So Domaine Chandon, as it's known in the Yarra Valley, is one of a number of estates that Chandon have developed over the years outside France. The back label of the bottle suggests that the first one of these developments was 1959 in Argentina. They've had wineries in Brazil, there's been Domaine Chandon in California, and of course Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy own Cloudy Bay and make the Palate sparkling wine in Marlborough in New Zealand. So there's an awful lot of experience coming from Champagne and from right the way around the world in terms of making sparkling wine within Moet Chandon and the broader Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy group. So as I say, this is a blend of Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. I don't know what the proportion of the blend is. I will try and find that out. The wines will have undergone a second fermentation in bottle, so that will have been bottled with yeast and sugar, sealed with a crown cap, and that second fermentation creates the sparkle. Once the fermentation has finished, the yeasts will drop to the bottom of the bottle, where they will break down over a period of time as the wine ages. And you go through a process called autolysis, which is the yeast releasing sugars and proteins into the wine. And that does a number of things. It adds some sort of yeasty, biscuity notes, but it also affects the surface tension of the wine. It gives a sort of certain richness and texture, but also allows the formation of smaller bubbles and more persistent bubbles. And therefore, the longer time that the wine spends in the cellars aging with those yeast cells breaking down in the wine, the finer the bead of a sparkling wine will be and the more persistent it will be. I don't know how long this wine spends aging with its lees in the bottle. I should imagine it's somewhere in the region of 24 months. Again, I'll try and find that information and add it to this video for you. As far as I know, everything here fermented in stainless steel tanks. I would assume that a portion or possibly all of the fruit underwent malolactic conversion to stop the wine's acidity from being too sharp or too harsh. And certainly at the stage of dégorgement, at the end of this period of lees aging, the bottles are riddled, they'll be put in a gyropalette and mechanically manipulated to move the yeast into the neck of the bottle, so the bottle faces downward with the yeast sitting in the neck. That neck is then frozen in a brine solution and you end up with a plug of dead yeast cells, which can then be ejected by the pressure in the bottle. When you remove the crown cap at dégorgement, the bottle is then topped up with a little more wine, which will contain a dosage, a certain amount of sugar, helping to balance the wine. So a dry wine labelled as Brut is likely to have a dosage of 6 or 7 grams per litre of sugar, just to give the wine a balance. So let's have a look at the wine and see what we make of it, shall we? The first thing I'd say is that in premium economy, I actually have a glass, which is fantastic. The wine has a relatively pale yellow colour, and I hope that for the time that I've been talking, you can actually see there's a bead of fine bubbles rising within the wine. Because this isn't a flute, there isn't a nucleation site at the bottom, so they're rising from various points at the bottom of the glass. See if we get some aromas here. There are yeasty aromas. There's a fresh apple note, sort of green apples. There's a citric note, and after that, perhaps some hints of toastiness, a little brioche, those sort of yeasty notes coming through. But generally, it's a bright, fresh, clean aroma of appley fruit. So let's have a taste. The wine has quite a lively mousse. There's a fine bubble, and that seems to be enhancing the green appley notes there. And there's something about that appliness that makes me think that at least a portion of the wine may not have gone through malolactic conversion, because it's a slightly tart edge that's giving really quite a nice cut to the acidity. But actually that's being balanced by some sort of creamy, almost dairy-ish, leesy notes and a smooth, rounded texture, and that's clearly coming from the yeast aging the wine's received. The green edge and the wine's sort of immediate fruitiness makes me think this is a wine that probably has a reasonably high proportion of Chardonnay in it, because within a blend using the 3 classic champagne varieties, it's normal that Chardonnay gives the lift, the freshness and the elegance on the wine's attack. Pinot Noir tends to give richness and length, and actually that's one of the reasons Tony Jordan, when he established Domaine Chandon, wanted to source Pinot Meunier, because in terms of creating a palate curve for this wine, having had the initial attack and then the length of the Pinot Noir, the Meunier adds a bridging element between the two. It has a fruitiness that fills the mid-palate of the wine. The wine certainly doesn't seem sweet. Mouth-watering tartness, the acidity prevents that. The alcohol is completely balanced. Personally, I think this is a very well-made wine, and I find the crispness of the acidity gives the wine much more cut than I was expecting. It just makes it that bit more edgy and exciting. I would like it to have a longer finish. The bead is fine, and there is a restrained yeastiness that's adding some complexity to it. It is a wine that would probably age for 2 or 3 years and gain a little bit more complexity in that period. So perhaps I should be scoring that 91 out of 100. At any rate, I will leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see if it's available near you and at what price. So that just leaves me to say thank you so much for joining me. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. I'd really appreciate that. If you're watching these videos and enjoying them, do please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. That would really give me a boost and help me to develop the channel further. If you have friends you think might like to watch, please do feel free to pass it on to them. That would be an endorsement from you that I'd really appreciate. And if you have any questions or comments, do please pop those in the comments box below. I'd love to know what you think about the wines I'm looking at, the tastings I'm doing, or anything else that relates to that. So thank you once again for taking the time to watch this video, and I do hope that maybe you'll manage to make some time and come and join me for another video in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.